Hi, everyone. My name is John Doring, and this is ZoomTRAK. Good Saturday afternoon to all you N-scalers everywhere, and welcome to the July 2026 edition of ZoomTRAK by NRail. NRail is the organization promoting N-scale model railroading. That means N-track and T-track, Fremo N, club layouts, home layouts, no layouts, whatever it is, it's your pleasure. If it's in N-scale, you're in the right place. NRail is all about the knowledge, camaraderie, and joy of model railroading in the normal scale. So again, welcome everyone. Here's the lineup for this Saturday afternoon. We always open it with any announcements that anyone has to make. Then Kevin will be giving us an update on the new NRail website. We'll then have Matt Zaccaro talk about more artificial intelligence in model railroading. And we'll end today with Pursuing the Perfect Helix and Steve Cox. So I'll just start by asking if there are any announcements. And then we'll just go straight over to Kevin. And Kevin, you can let us know about the website.
Thanks, John. Let me flip over here for sharing. There we go. All right. I assume you guys can see that all right?
That looks good.
All right, awesome. All right. So my name's Kevin. I'm here on behalf of the web team, and we wanted to formally introduce you to the changes we have been making to the website. So although you said a new website, I'll correct that and I'll just say changes, almost like we're still in the same house. We just, cleaned it up a little bit.
Excellent. Yeah, there you go.
So one of the big things, and to illustrate kind of what we just spoke of there for a moment, is the content has stayed the same. I didn't really focus in on the content at this point in time. In most part, the content still is pretty decent, pretty good. It's not that the content needed change. The changes that we did make at the content level were basically cosmetic. So things like places where it used to say NTRack when it really should have said NRail at this point, those types of things. As we move things around, maybe we added a new sentence here or there or removed a sentence. But in general, the content we left alone at this point. We were focusing more on the optimization of the website itself. So, I've nicknamed this phase one. That makes it sound all nice and formal. It just made it an easy phrase. But anyway, phase one, what did we do? So we focused on the website's usability. We wanted to optimize the site for both humans and for search engines. For those of you that might be familiar in the tech world, we call it search engine optimization. Usability and optimization, really, these are just fancy buzzwords. And really what it comes down to is making things easier to use and making the site more predictable in its use. So we wanted to be more consistent. We wanted to be less surprising. We didn't want to frustrate our users. And we wanted to make things easy to find. So be consistent. Just like in a magazine or a newspaper, we want to have the same visual voice throughout the entire site. So having this constant look makes the site look good and makes us look good. And being consistent also helps our visitors on finding things. The headers are all the same. They're the same color. They're the same size. Links and menus are all in the same location, etc. So by making these adjustments, now you can very quickly scroll through and you don't have to kind of relearn what each page is all about. So you don't have to relearn that this page has headings centered and that page had the headings all on the left side. Those little types of things like that. We went through and made everything very consistent throughout the site. Same thing with the naming scheme. So throughout the site, NRail versus T-track, N-track, N-scale, etc. All those types of things, making sure the capitalizations were the same throughout, just to give everything a nice, consistent, professional looking feel. Don't want to surprise people. Don't want to surprise people. This is one of my personal mantras when it comes to any type of web design, and a website should be predictable. This is probably something that most of us don't really think about, but that's exactly the way it should be. If we're actually thinking about the mechanics of the website, then there probably is something that's gone wrong. We don't think about how our car runs whenever we get in, but as soon as something goes wrong, that's when we start thinking about it, right? So we had many links that would open up in a new window, and then we had other links that would open up in the same window. And this would often break that back arrow history, right? How do you go back to where you were? So we made those links always opening up in the same window whenever you are staying on the site. Links that open up onto another site are the ones that open up into the new window. So that way the old window of our site is still present. Links that would take you to extra files now acknowledge that either within the list. So like on the newspaper, or I'm sorry, the newsletter page, you're going to be opening up PDF files because that's a list of PDFs. Other places on the site, if it's not quite so obvious based on the content or the context clues, then we acknowledge those by giving them the little symbol. So these are all different ways to help make it less surprising. Things that we can do to make it not frustrating to the user. All right. The other thing we had content that just wasn't what it was expected. A good example, we had an About Us page, and the only thing it said on that page was that NRail was a 501c. Like, that's not really about us. That's not what we are about. There's a lot more detail into that is what we're about. That's just one little element about what the group is, right? So in that same regard, or in a very similar thing, is we want to make things easier to find. So NRail, basically the site, if you think about our site is a resource site, just like an encyclopedia or a library. And we're here to help others find information. That's to compare to other types of sites, such as a news website where there's always update information, or social media site where you're always like posting up your favorite photos and all that. Those are the different types of sites, or a sales like Amazon or eBay. We are a resource site. We are here for people to find info. So with that in mind, we wanted to make it easier for them to find that information. So content's been moved to match the page's purpose. As I noted earlier about the About Us page, we filled in the About Us. That actually now talks about what we are about and our organizational structure and those types of things, for example. On the homepage, we had a little blurb about how Jim started NRail or NTRaK, what became NRail. And that section was titled, What is NRail? But really, it didn't tell you anything about what is NRail. It was actually history. So we moved that bit of blurb over to the history page, right? So we moved things around based on where they fit better. Also, another thing we had was a lot of call to actions without the path to follow that call to action. So now all of our call to actions include that path. So if it says contact the webmaster, then there's an email link so that you can contact the webmaster. If it said see the events page, now it actually has a link to the events page. It helps to make that path. Again, we're making things easy for people or users to find. We talked earlier about the consistent use of headers. That makes it easier as you're scrolling the page. You can find things easier. Long pages broken up and or reformatted. So a lot of stuff we had was very just a long scroll of pages after content after content. So we broke those up into 2 columns, or we reformatted them to fit into 2 different pages, those types of things. Again, just another way to help make things easier to find. And probably the biggest one was we put everything into the menu or the footer. So everything is now across the menu at the top or across the footer menu at the bottom. There are no pages that are only available through a certain path. We had a number of pages where you had to know the path to find the page. Now every page is either in the menu or in the footer. So what we generically call orphan pages. You didn't have any pages that are just kind of lost out there in the corner. Looking through my notes, I think I got all that one. So in that last one, the added bonus of that actually is that the site software that we have uses that menu to build the site page. So before, where we had a site page that was really not very much of a site page, it only contained those handful of pages that were in the menu. Now every page is on the site page. So if you ever do end up on a page that a 404 error, cannot be found, you'll land at the sitemap, and the sitemap does have every single page listed there. So that's another one of those little added benefits, or those added human side of making it computer optimized, right? So we bring those two things together, and it ends up creating a situation where it makes it better for us. So here's a little nod to my friends. Those of us in scouting, we know a phrase, and I'm sure we've all heard it in many other ways as well. Feedback is a gift. So we would love to hear from you. What do you like or not like about the website? All feedback is a gift. I don't care whether it's good or bad. At the end of this session, we're going to have a little survey question or two. So I'd love for you guys to answer that. Also, you can email us directly. Again, there's the contact us at. So you can email us there. That actually goes to the whole team, not just one person. So as we wrap up with phase one, we'd love to hear a little bit about what you think of it, a little bit of feedback in that regard. And that's taking us to phase two, we could really use your help. Moving along now is the content. Phase two, we want to focus in on that content and really polish that up as well and make that better than what it already is. Our history page, in my opinion, could really use a little polish. Also, you'll notice our history page kind of just stops at one point, and there's probably about 10 more years of history that could get added onto there that we just don't have there, right? NTRaK page, the NTRaK pages is something that I personally am not overly familiar with, so that could use probably a little bit of more updating, right? I know we have other module scales that I would love to see some information added on to. Photos, just general photos of us out there having fun together, us building modules, our home layouts, photos that we can use on the website. If you have a photo you want us to use, let us know, send it up. We're going to start kind of just rotating out photos, some of those ones that are just general photos. We would love to see from you guys as well. And then always the general proofreading. Anyone who knows me knows I am the worst at English. So if you can get on there and you find a spelling error, you find a capitalization error, etc., don't hesitate to send us an email. But we would love to have your help as well. Oh, I'm gonna pass it back. I don't know if I do technically have 2 minutes. If anyone does have some questions, I can certainly take a question or two. But I know we have a lot more fun things happening today.
Well, that's awesome, Kevin. My big question was going to be what's going to happen in phase two, but you got to that. Uh, so for sure. Yeah. It sort of makes me think too that I'm not sure exactly what the best way to do this. But I know there are lots of folks out in the community that have something they could contribute history wise. You've been around a while, you know something about the story of NTRaK or TTRaK or just N-scale in general. So maybe we have to figure out a way to make that easier to do if you're not into kind of like typing something up or writing an article. Um, we could do like interview style right here on ZoomTRaK. So those of you who've been a part of clubs for a long time or can sort of harken back to the early days or anything along the way. Yeah, let's take Kevin up on the invitation to become a part of the team.
I would love to hear some more of the history of it.
Yeah, me
And
too.
honestly, at this point, I know you said it's don't know how we handle it. I would say if you have a thought, even just email us. We'll pass it around and we'll find a way to incorporate it somewhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds great. All right, very good, Kevin. Thanks so much. We appreciate that. And I know I got a little chance to see that on the board call last night, so it's exciting to have the thing just be more workable and functional as well. So perfect. All right, I guess we are ready for part two here, and this is more information about using AI and model railroading. And Matt's back with us via video to share some knowledge there.
We are going to have to pass on that. The video file has a problem with it.
Uh-oh.
I can't play it. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
be darn. Okay.
I don't think Matt made it to the meeting either.
No,
So,
I think he said he wasn't going to be able to make it. So,
yeah, last time we had a file from him that we had no problems and he was here also. So,
well, of course.
the way it goes sometimes.
All right. Well, that means we'll get that one in a Zoom track down the road. So, Steve,
Yep.
it's like we were going to bring you in for to close the game, but now you're going to get middle relief also. So,
No worries. Do you want me to take talk slow and take twice as long?
yeah, yeah. I'm sure you've got plenty to say about helixes. So
Oh yeah, yeah,
let
I
us have it.
do. I can say a lot. So anyway, let me share my screen here, and it says you cannot start to screen share while the other participant is sharing.
You should be okay now.
Okay, looks good. Um, all right, let me know if you can see the first slide there.
Yep.
Yeah,
We
you're
see
all
it.
good now.
Very good. Okay, I'm just going to adjust a few things here. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, John. My name's Stephen Cox. I'm the head of product design at Precision Model Railroad. And I've been a N-scale modeler for over 50 years. I ditched my Triang Hornby HO equipment at age 11 and have never really looked back. So N-scale for life. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about pursuing the perfect helix, and I'll have some tips on design, construction, and layout integration. Uh, Specifically, I'll be talking about both design and construction factors. And then I'll talk about examples of using design and construction to end up with a perfect helix. And at the end, I'll wrap up with a few comments about building a helix yourself versus using a helix kit. And I want to say up front, there is no math in this talk, even though helixes can be math heavy at points. Um, and it goes without saying, I think, that there really is no perfect helix. It's not like there's some guy out there leaning back with a cold beverage, feeling smug because they have the best helix in the world. Really, what counts here is that you end up with the perfect helix for your layout. And that way we can all feel proud of the helix that we have in our layout, or more than one helix if that's the case. But it's important to get it right, and that's what I'll be talking about today. So for people who are new to the hobby, Helix is an ingenious method to wrap a grade into a space-efficient spiral. Um, Typically, to get high enough to go over another track, you're looking at 8 to 10 feet in N scale. And if you want to go up 16 to 18 inches, we typically don't have that linear run available to us. And so wrapping that into a spiral is a very efficient use of space to get from one elevation to another. And my first encounter with a helix, the first time I ever saw one was in the 1979 issue of Model Railroader, and Jim Hediger had an article about his Ohio Southern, and it included the helix you can see in the lower right there. Generally considered the first example of double deck layouts. Don't really want to quibble about whether that's true or not. But the important thing is that he had developed a helix using spacer blocks, fairly overbuilt, as much of the benchwork has been over many decades. But you can see it there. It goes up about 6 or 7 levels, and by all accounts worked very well for the life of the layout. So helixes are, like anything else in engineering, involve trade-offs. Helixes will take some space, but they enable a multi-deck layout. So you give something to get something. And typically the advantages are well worth the effort. You can add staging to your layout. You can end up with more scenic area on your layout. You can have a longer run. You can add more switching. It's really whatever additional layout you want to add. However, the Helix definitely takes up some space. And of course, we all know this in N scale, but just to drive the point home, this is a 16-inch radius Helix in a 12 by 14-foot railroad space. Compare that to an HO scale Helix at 26 inches, and this is not as good. The grade on the HO Helix would be greater than the one on the N scale Helix, but for the space for giving up 3 linear feet of your wall space, you really can just about double or triple your layout enjoyment in the room that you have or in the space that you have. So definitely worth considering. You get a lot for it. So there are many different helix types. If you've been in the hobby for any length of time, you'll see lots of different ways to make helixes. One of the most common is to use spacer blocks where the decks are held apart by blocks of a uniform size. There's threaded rod where typically we set up what looks like a forest of threaded rods. And the advantage of the threaded rod approach is that it uses nuts to position the decks. Now, with the spacer block, the decks are positioned exactly right just on the basis of the thickness of this block. With the threaded rod, you can adjust things, but there is a lot of twiddling and spinning of nuts to get something like this built. And one of the challenges with the threaded rod helix is that you need full-length threaded rods. And when you're laying track as you go, as you need to do in a helix, it can be a little bit difficult to navigate around all of these rods sticking up in the air. There are also helixes that are made with kind of a bent structure and segmented deck that goes between each of the bents. And there are also tiered helixes. Tom Danneman, I believe, built an N-scale helix in his Moffat route layout, something akin to this, which involved increasing the radius as the helix went up. And the one advantage of this method is that you can get away with a grade that doesn't allow you to cross the next lap. So this could maybe only be half a car tall, but that doesn't matter. The trade-off, of course, is that you end up with a helix that gets wider and wider as it gets taller. So helixes have a problem. Helixes are complex, and for many people, many modelers, they're intimidating. And I think that of most concern is it's really easy to make a bad helix that takes no effort at all. And typically when we do something, it takes multiple attempts to get good at it. So when you're building just one, we're going to need some help. I find this a lot that, in anything in railroading, your first couple of attempts really are never your best ones, but they're where you're learning how to do whatever that particular task is. And helixes are no different. So a lot of a successful helix comes from the design factors. And if you get the design right, construction will be easy, and a great helix really should be inevitable. It shouldn't be, hope this turns out well. It should just be, okay, we know what we need to do, we build it, it'll be fine. And I think we've all operated on layouts where it didn't end up fine, or there was a problem of some kind. And this talk is intended to help you address the right considerations so that when you do build your own helix, that you end up with a great outcome. So let's start with geometry. This is the most basic aspect of a helix. And the fundamental consideration is, what grade do you want? Grade is scale independent. A 2% grade on an N scale layout or on an HO scale layout or on the prototype, 2% is 2%. It's the exact same angle. If you have a lower grade, it's going to be easier for your trains to climb, and it's going to be a longer run. Your trains will spend more time in the helix. If you have a higher grade, it's going to be harder to climb, but it will be a shorter run. Typical operating range for most layouts is somewhere in the range of 1.5, 1.75, thereabouts, up to about 3%. Once you go over 3%, you're really kind of asking for operational difficulties. Radius is another important consideration. The wider you make the radius, the higher the radius, the easier it's going to be to climb, but you'll end up with a longer run. And the lower the radius, the converse is true. It'll be harder to climb, you'll end up with a shorter run. Typical values in N scale are 12 inches up to about 20 inches. You seldom need to go up much past 20 inches. People do build them larger like that, but it's not usually necessary. And 20 inches will get you in around the 2% mark. And lastly, vertical rise really matters when you're lining up to build a helix. How high do you want to go? Typical layout deck separations are anywhere in the range of, say, 12 to 15 inches. What's important about that is you also have to factor the thickness of the deck above. So you may want 12 inches of separation between your decks, but then you have to allow for 3, 4, 5 inches of deck thickness for the deck above. And here's the thing, even if you understand the math and the geometry that's involved, math doesn't always work in our favor. Not all radius and grade and vertical rise combinations have a viable solution. And typically what happens is you will end up in a scenario where the separation between one deck and another is not sufficient to allow your trains to pass through safely. So when that happens, you have to change something. You have to change the radius, you have to change the grade. Those things have to be adjusted in order to find a solution that will actually work for you. So let's talk a little bit about vertical rise and what needs to be considered there. When you have one deck, you can get the perfect height for you and for the people who operate with you. The moment you add an extra deck to your layout, it's going to be a compromise of some sort. You have to start thinking about sight lines. What can you see in the deck that is covered? How deep is that deck? The thickness of that deck and the separation all matter. That all affects what you can see and the deck below, what you can reach out to. What does it mean for maintenance? Lighting is a key issue. Once you've got one deck below another, the lighting is typically going to be underneath that deck, and you want to try and balance the lighting for that lower deck with the rest of the room. So there's some additional work involved, but again, definitely well worth it. But some considerations in layout planning. Lots of things you can do. You can make the upper deck slightly narrower. You can increase the distance between decks. You know, the list goes on. But there's a lot to it. And again, not all radius and grade and vertical rise combinations have a viable helix solution. And the vertical separation is going to affect what helixes you can employ. If anybody is interested, at the Precision Model Railroad blog, we have a blog post on deck heights for a double deck layout. And that also includes an Excel calculator for determining what can you see on one deck when it's covered by another. And we're happy to send you a copy of that calculator if you're interested. Now let's talk a little bit about clearances. Vertical clearances determines what kind of trains you can fit through, and we typically want to be able to fit anything that we can buy at the store, and that usually means tall cars like double stacks and auto racks. The minimum vertical clearance as specified by NRail is just under 2 inches. The maximum is really a trade-off with grade. You can have a greater and greater separation between your decks, and it's typically less than 2 times the minimum. So it's rare to see a deck separation of, say, 4 inches or more. And when you have that much separation, you can always reduce the grade in that helix, and that's generally desirable. So it's rare to see a helix that 6, 7 inches between decks. It's usually unnecessary to do it. So typically anywhere from 2.5 to about 4 inches is what you'll have between your decks. Now, when we're looking at horizontal clearances, we're looking to manage things like side swipes or being efficient with the material that we're using. So again, we look to the NRail for recommendations. The recommendations for side clearance are dependent on radius. So it depends on what radius you're actually using. Different inside and outside clearances result from that. But as an example, an 18-inch radius has a side clearance of just under an inch, which means the entire helix deck can be roughly 1.5 to 1.75 inches wide, including space for the supports. But that will allow you to run long equipment like 89-foot auto racks or passenger cars. One of our customers has a 16-inch radius helix, and they quite happily run their big boy up and down that. We build all of our helixes to NRail standards, but if you're building your own helix, you definitely want to make sure that the side clearance is sufficient, and that goes for adding a second track. You want to make sure that the equipment on each track is not going to sideswipe itself. So what about when we're changing from horizontal into the grade itself? These are vertical curves, and there's one at the bottom and there's one at the top of the grade. And what should we put there? It should not be as drawn here in the example where it goes directly from horizontal to the grade. NRail recommends a smooth gradual transition between horizontal and inclined track sections using easements to avoid abrupt changes in track grade and alignment. Well, what it's talking about there is a very large radius curve here. And when I say large, I mean about 6 feet in radius. Now, NRail makes no actual recommendation for that radius. So if you look around on the internet, you will find there are a number of rules of thumb, such as 1 to 2 times the length of the longest car for each % of grade, or say a 50-foot radius vertical curve. Or I even found a long article with a lot of good information, but at the end it said just wing it till it works. And a lot of us end up in that scenario. It's where you will encounter derailments, because this causes the couplers of one car to shift vertically relative to the car it's attached to. So it's worth getting right. But when you're building your own helix from scratch, you need to figure out a way to make that a smooth transition. And most of us end up in this third point, just winging it. With our kits, we actually make special long spaces to go from the horizontal into the grade itself, depending on the grade of the helix. And this is the profile of that spacer. And you can't really see it here, but this top surface is not straight. It's actually a gentle curve going from horizontal into the grade. So that's one advantage to using a kit helix. Now let's talk about strength, because building your helix is one thing, but building it so that it's strong is very important. The deck needs to be at the correct elevations throughout the length of the deck, and the helix needs to handle any vertical loads, which may include supporting part of the deck above. Vertical loads are mainly handled by the helix supports. So with a threaded rod helix, they'll be handled by the threaded rods. If you've got a bent helix, they'll be handled through the bents. And if you have a spacer block helix, those loads are handled by the spacer blocks. Now, if we look at horizontal strength, this is where we have forces applied to the side. You might bump into the helix, or something may end up leaning against it with some force. So this tends to cause what's known as racking, where the geometry of the helix doesn't stay consistent while the force is being applied, and this can also cause the deck to move along its length. Now, this is bad. If your helix moves, your track moves, and that's usually bad for your track. So we really want a helix that is very, very strong, robust, and so the supports and the deck tend to resist racking, and not all designs are equal in this regard. Here are two typical methods. One is a kind of a segmented approach to the deck. And if we build our own helixes, we end up with this to some degree. Oftentimes the pieces are longer than this, but we're butt joining those pieces. And we have to consider how will that handle forces applied to the side. So this is what the deck looks like in a typical segmented deck, whereas in a continuous deck, it's usually made from overlapping tiles from bottom to top. It's one continuous piece by the time you're done. And the nice thing about a continuous deck is when you push on the sides, it doesn't want to go out of radius. It tends to resist that. So you get the benefit of the structure holding those deck elements in place as well as the deck itself, contributing to the strength of that helix. Okay, so we've got a design, but what can happen? We can experience construction challenges. It can be hard to build. It can require adjustments by the user. It can be a wasteful design. When it's built, if it isn't built well, we end up with unreliable train operation. We can end up with variable speeds or stalls, unable to haul longer trains. We can end up with uncoupling on transitions in and out. We can have derailments or sideswiping. All of these are the negative effects from not getting the design factors correct. And of course, if we don't build it strong enough, we have, potentially because we used weak or unstable materials or we used a weak design, the net result is that the owner and the operators are going to be unhappy. Whereas if your design is good and if you build it well, it's going to be easy to build, the trains will run well, and you'll end up with a strong, stable helix. You'll be happy, and so will your operators. And this is really the intent of this talk. This is where we want to be. So do your research. Prototyping is valuable. If you're not sure what grade you need, then get a 2x4 and lay some track on it temporarily and set up a 2% grade and see how your lightest locomotives handle your longest trains. And you can determine what you can handle. A straight grade is one thing. A curve grade will actually reduce the ability to haul up that grade. But some prototyping can really help you understand what you'll need in your layout. There is always some math involved if you're designing your own helix, so double check your math. And if you find any errors, obviously correct them as you find them. Now, in construction, even if you have a good design, you can still end up with an uneven or inconsistent track path. Seldom as bad as the picture up here, but to the extent that your train is going around the helix on a radius that varies from slightly tighter to slightly broader, now you're causing the cars to basically pivot, and somewhere in there may be an opportunity for things to disconnect. Weak joints are a problem, so you need to make sure that every joint in your helix is strong so that it resists racking and resists tipping. And to the extent that you're building your own helix, another big consideration is the utilization of the material. And the parts for a helix, particularly the deck parts, tend to be difficult to lay out on a sheet of plywood, and a lot of the plywood ends up being waste. And as much as we all like to think that we use the scraps of plywood that we end up with, a lot of times it just ends up not being used at all. So a big consideration is, do I use long pieces of deck like this, which are more difficult to lay out, or do I use shorter pieces, but now I'm dealing with a segmented deck with lots of butt joints, and I need to make sure that those all join nice and strongly. So definitely some things to consider in the construction phase. So make sure you lay out your parts carefully if you're cutting them yourself. And be very careful cutting them. There's a lot of jigsawing. Cut them carefully, and then when you're done, sand the track path smooth. You want both the radius to be consistent and you want the grade to be consistent all the way up the helix. So let's look at some actual examples. When you're choosing your helix design, you need to think about, where am I going to get the parts from? How easy will it be to construct? Of all of these techniques, the one I have not done is the threaded rod, but I've seen enough examples of people building them that I'm not really inclined to take that on. It has some advantages, but it's a difficult construction with the threaded rod. And what will be the strength of your finished helix? So I'm going to give you an example using spacer block. I'm very partial to spacer block. And just to run through some of the examples, it's a precise way to space your decks. They're very easy to make, very simple to assemble. It strongly resists racking. Because the blocks are basically on the inside of the deck, it minimizes the helix footprint overall. There's no measurement or special tools needed or special adjustments. You just put the block in and move around to the next one. And the supports don't interfere with construction. So when you're laying track on level 1, there's nothing above it to get in the way and make that track laying difficult. Let's talk briefly about materials. What you're looking for is a strong, stable, lightweight material. Very common choice is plywood. Use Baltic birch if you can get a hold of it. It's strong, it's stable, it's lightweight. Dimensional lumber is often where people go to. I've built a helix using MDF. It's strong, but it's very heavy, so it's not a portable type of material. And it's certainly not something that you would want to use in a portable layout. Materials like foam or foam core or fiberboard, they're lightweight, which is great, but they often lack durability in the setting of a helix. We need to pick some numbers, and a lot of people contact us at Precision Model Railroad wanting a helix, but they're not really sure what to put in there. Many of us build layouts without a predefined plan. And at some point, you have to pick a radius and a grade and a vertical rise. Now, if you don't already have your second deck in place, this is the ace up your sleeve, because you can make adjustments to your vertical rise and still maximize your radius and minimize your grade. But if your second deck is already in place, then you don't have the ability to adjust this one, and we really just have radius and grade to play with. There are a few tricks we can do, but fundamentally it comes down to radius and grade. So we'll take an example here of an N-scale helix, 17.5-inch radius. We're looking for a grade at about 2.2% and a 12-inch rise from bottom to top. Now, we have pretty much all the possible helix combinations that are viable on our website. So feel free to utilize this as a resource. Just use our helix selector to see what combinations are possible. We're looking to go up 12 inches. So we're going to click here where it says 12 to 14 inches. And we can see across the top, we have all of the vertical rises from 12 inches up to 14 inches. And we want to use a radius of 17.5 inches. So that's this row here. And there are several solutions listed here. Each of these is a helix solution. And depending on the column it in, it tells you how high you will be at that point. So 3% is higher than we want. 2.4% is higher than we want. And that would require us to go up slightly higher at 12.25 inches. But sometimes we have that latitude. Maybe we can even go up as much as an inch or two. And this is coming back to what I was saying earlier. If you can adjust that vertical rise, then you end up with more options to choose from. In this particular case, 2.4% is the best that we can do if we want to keep the vertical rise to about 12 inches. There is another one down here at 2.3%. That's closer to what we want at 12 inches, but we would need the space to increase from 17.5-inch radius to 18 inches. And sometimes you have that extra room and sometimes you don't. So it's very much a trade-off. We have this discussion a lot with our customers. If you're contemplating a helix and you'd like to get a reality check and discuss what you have in mind, we're more than happy to hear from you. And we have a lot of folks that just call us up and discuss what they're planning for their helix. So not all combinations will work. There are things that you can do. If you, let's say, for example, you're running a transition era layout and you're not going to be running auto racks and double stacks, you can reduce the clearance, the vertical clearance, and that will give you back some grade points, maybe up to 0.5%, depending on how low you're prepared to put the vertical separation, or the separation between decks. But if you want to run everything, including modern equipment, we can't utilize that to make things work. Now, when you build your Helix, what do you build it on? Well, I highly recommend building it on a base that is not your layout itself. I think it's a good idea to build a Helix in such a way that it is portable. I actually have one right next to me, which I can pick up with one hand. And during construction, that's really helpful. If you have a base, you can actually use your jigsaw to cut out part of the deck so that this will lift up and become the first part of your first loop. But building it on a separate base allows you to turn the Helix and maybe build it in a separate area if you have that option, and then bring it into the layout and install it when it's done. Laying track right in front of you is so much better than reaching across in an awkward position to solder joints because you're building your Helix in place. So I highly recommend make it portable and then bring it over. That also makes it recoverable if and when you have to move your layout. The Helixes that we sell, we provide a base that has the engraved positions of all of the spaces. So that's one advantage of going to a Helix kit, is that everything is laid out where it needs to be positioned. Now the deck, as we talked earlier, you have some choices. You can use a continuous deck, you can use a segmented deck, pros and cons to that. But ultimately, it supports your roadbed and your track. And we really want that to be smooth and thin. We want it to be just a perfect path for our trains to travel up. Continuous decks, good for resisting racking, very strong. Can also be made very thin. Here we are adding another loop to a Helix here. I'm actually building this Helix at a trade show. Certainly thin decks like this can be easily joined with an overlapping joint like this. Whereas when you have butt joints, you typically need to have brackets or additional material to span across the joint, and you have to allow clearances for those as well. So when we're constructing, really what we're looking for here is we want to be able to build our Helix without making careful measurements, without making fine adjustments, without a lot of hard work or concentration. Now, spacer block methodology, the way that you do that is you get your very first loop perfect, and then everything else is just templating off that. It's just one spacer block above it all the way up to the top. So I think this is a really excellent way to build a Helix. Some people will argue that if you do the threaded rod methodology, that every point on the Helix is adjustable, and that's great. But now every point on your Helix is adjustable, and that's on you to get them all to the correct position. Different horses for different courses. My personal preference is spacer block. But I like the idea of you put the part in place, it fits in place where it's supposed to be, and that is correct. I can move on to the next one. I don't need to worry about whether it's correct or not. Okay, so another thing is your parts. You end up with a lot of parts in a Helix. Very good to have them all labeled. They should, as much as possible, be self-aligning. You want to minimize the measurements that you need to make. We provide jigs with our Helixes to make sure that you build perfect circles for each loop of the Helix with no other adjustment required. But give some thought to that. If you're designing your own Helix, how are you going to know which part goes where? If you can, design it in such a way that you use the same part all the way. And certainly with any spacer block Helix, these spacer blocks can all be the same dimension. But it's definitely something worth considering ahead of time. What will I be dealing with during construction? And as I mentioned earlier, making the Helix movable and being able to pick it up is hugely beneficial. It's great because it makes it easy to construct, but it also, when you're laying track and when you're wiring it, so much easier. Just as an example, this is a double helix demonstrator. We actually sell this as a kit, but this is one helix inside another, and the train runs up the outside and down the inside. But you can pick this up with one hand. It's been to dozens of train shows, and it just illustrates the benefit of being able to move your helix. Um, Obviously, if you're building a helix into your layout, you want to be able to pick it up and manipulate it, but put it where you need it to be, um, and not have to, shoehorn your way into the space between the helix and the wall in order to solder a joint. So definitely consider that when you're coming to build your helix. And track, ultimately, it comes down to what is the track? That's what the train sees. Smooth is good. A smooth helix deck is going to mean smooth track. Smooth in terms of a consistent radius, smooth in terms of consistent grade. And this is something I tell everyone who will listen to me. Your helix track should be the best laid track in your layout. It should be the most bulletproof, never have to think about it. And what I would recommend to anyone contemplating building a helix is, where possible, use Kato UniTRAK. Kato UniTRAK is very, very reliable. It's obviously very consistent when it comes to radius. And really, the only reason I would recommend not using it is if you want a radius that Kato doesn't offer. But other than that, I highly recommend using Kato UniTRAK. It's fast, it's easy. You can actually lay the track after the helix is built if you want to. It has so many advantages and really very little in the way of downside. I'm not saying don't put flex track in your helixes, but the moment you do, you have to think very carefully about joints that you make, and you have to think very carefully about expansion, depending on what the temperature and humidity variations are where you operate. Whereas none of that's an issue with UniTRAK. So that's just my 2 cents on track, but I think it's a great way to go. And feeders, electrical feeders, at least one per loop is a great idea. Having said that, I run that double helix, which is essentially a 7-layer helix. It's 3.5 loops, one inside the other. But I just have a single feed for that has almost 80 feet of track, and we never have in trouble with trains running when they're most distant from that feed. And that's a point worth considering as well. Helixes will inevitably have a lot of track. It's a consideration when you're building it. It's a lot to purchase, and then it's a lot to install. Again, UniTRAK is going to get you out of a lot of trouble in that regard. So once you're done, if you have built your helix in place, well, it's just a matter of connecting the sub-road bed top and bottom if it's not already connected. Whereas if you built it off the layout, you bring it over to the benchwork that you have. The benchwork obviously needs to hold your helix nice and stable. So nice solid benchwork to support it. Put it onto the layout correctly positioned. Connect your sub-road bed top and bottom and connect the track, and you're good to go. Installing on the layout, if you did build it separately, it also means that you can move it if you need to move the layout, or you can recover it for a different layout if you decide to change and build a new one. So just before I wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about obtaining parts, because you really have two choices. You can take the DIY/woodworking approach, and that typically means you'll need to design the helix yourself or follow someone else's plans. That may be a sketch. It may be something that's on CAD. That may mean that you need to lay out your parts on a sheet of plywood or multiple sheets of plywood and jigsaw them out. And of course, in more recent times, some people have access to CNC machines, so that's not a bad way to go as well. if you do have access to that, it'll certainly save you a lot of noise and risk doing your own jigsawing. But not all of us have access to a CNC machine. The alternative is that there are multiple suppliers of Helix kits. In that particular case, the math and the design and the parts are made for you. Make sure, whomever you buy your Helix from, that your supplier has these things, that they have a comprehensive range of radius and grade, so that what you need, they can build. I highly recommend a continuous deck, but choose a design that, at the very least, that resists racking and other forces that your Helix will experience. Make sure it's built from stable materials. Make sure the transitions from horizontal to the grade are included and correct. And what we see a lot is that there is a lot of discussion ahead of purchasing your Helix, and there are a lot of things to get comfortable with, and sometimes trade-offs in terms of radius and grade and so on. So make sure whoever you deal with has good customer service and support, because this isn't a simple decision for most people, and there are often choices. Okay, well, that's everything I have. Hopefully, I've covered all of the different considerations for making the perfect Helix, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.
Fantastic, Steve. I actually have a long list of questions, so I think I'm probably going to have to call you up afterwards and go through them one at a time. And there were some questions in the chat along the way, but I think by now you've probably hit a lot of those.
Okay.
Because your kit is sort of a segmented design, but because of the way it's engineered, I guess it ends up coming together in what looks a lot more like a continuous thing. Is that right?
Ours is a, let me show, well, you can see here, adding the final portion of the deck here.
Yeah.
These tiles, so in a kit, you can't ship big parts. You have to break it down into smaller parts.
Yeah.
So these tiles run in one direction on the top layer and in the opposite direction on the bottom layer. So it's the same tile overlapped twice, resulting in a 1/4 inch thick deck. And every join is approximately 3 to 6 inches, depending on the size of the helix.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And there was a question. There was a question about
I'm gonna go
Kato.
ahead, John. I'm going to put up the poll while you continue with questions. So.
Okay. Yeah. One other question I have, Steve, because of the way my space is laid out, I'm going to need to be able to access my helix from the inside, which I think you see kind of commonly in HO scale layouts because there's just more room.
Yep.
In this case, though, I'm guessing I'm going to have to get up at least to, I don't know, 20 inches radius or something like that just to be able to get inside the thing.
Yeah. And there's no fundamental problem with that. It'll just take up more space. I mean, if we look, come back up here. There we go. This is a 16-inch radius. If you go 18, it's going to be about 3.5 feet. But I don't know how acrobatic you are these days, John, but you know, crawling under the layout and then standing up in here, you need a little bit of room. So I'd say 18 to 20 is probably what you'd be looking at.
Right. Yeah, it's not going to be ideal. It'd be better if it was still bigger still, but like you said, that ends up taking a lot of space. And
could I ask what you need to get inside the helix for?
Just kind of where I'm thinking about putting it. I don't have. I'm assuming. Well, first of all, I guess I'm assuming that I need to be able to access the helix in case I've got a derailment or something. I need to be able to like get to it.
True enough. And so you either reach down from the top or up from the bottom. So fair enough. A lot depends on, how big is your vertical rise.
Yeah.
I mean, some helixes are only 2 layers high. They're not really trying to go from one deck to another. But yes, access is obviously very important.
Yeah, the alternative for me, and I haven't kind of figured it out yet, would essentially sort of making a door on the front, sort of where I can open it up like a cabinet.
Um,
You know, I
I'd
mean,
like to see that, John, when you when you make it.
yeah. So I don't know. I'm still working on all that.
Sure.
Um, and another question I had, I guess I grew up, I don't know, in my head thinking that 2% was sort of always going to be kind of my max, a max grade. I think that goes all the way back to the time when I was 10 or 12 years old.
Yep.
Um, so I know we can go a little bit more than that, but it seems to me that 3% is really, really high. But then if I have a double track one, then I could be coming downstream on the
Yeah.
higher
Look,
grade, right?
in a perfect world, I agree. Get below 2%, but right away you're in N scale, 2% pretty much puts you at 20 plus inches.
Yeah.
So that's that's about 4 feet across. So you're going to give up 16 square feet approximately just for your helix. Now, some folks have that room, and not everybody does. So that's really your trade-off there. I mean, if you have the space, then by all means, we, we make helixes up. We make HO helixes up to 36 inches. So the radius, it doesn't really matter to us what radius you want to go with, but from the consideration of the layout owner, that you're starting to get into a fairly space hungry helix once you're out into the 20
Right.
plus inches.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And just quickly on grade, most most folks who want to be below 2% tend to be running a lot of steam and heavy passenger equipment. So they'll be running 12-car heavyweight passengers cars behind a single steam locomotive, where it would not have been prototypical to have a second locomotive on point. And
Mm.
typically, steam locomotives, they don't have a lot of weight over the traction wheels. So um, those are the situations where grade is really going to matter. But if you're running more modern era operations where, throwing an extra unit on is not going to stand out as unusual, tends not to be an issue. And on the high side, I agree with you. 3% is high. That's as far as we list on our website.
Yeah.
I mean, if someone comes to me and says, I'd like a 3.5% helix, I'll explain why that could be problematic. But at the end of the day, people have different reasons why they want it, and we can certainly build that. But I highly recommend being closer to 2% than 3%.
But again, if you have it for people thinking about that, right? If you have a double track, they're going to have slightly different grades, but
Correct.
you could sort of just nominate the highest grade track to be always going in the downhill direction.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay.
Yeah.
And also you mentioned in your talk that kind of the recommended clearance or the minimum clearance based on the size of an in-scale freight car. But as I was sort of taking notes, it's like, yeah, my fingers are a lot bigger than that. So
Yeah.
what should it be for, kind of in scale,
And
knowing that you might have to fiddle with it, right?
yeah. Um, well, bear in mind, this is so the NMRA talks about the distance to the obstacle. So in our case, this would be the distance from the railhead to the underside of the deck above. So then you've also got the thickness. Well, first of all, you don't want it to be scraping along the deck above. So you need some minimum clearance there. We tend to use 1/2 inch there
Hmm.
as a minimum. Then you've got the thickness of the deck. So you're at least 3/4 inches above, which brings you up to about 2.5. So I would say 2.5 is a good minimum from the top of one deck to the top of the next deck. 3 inches is better. And in your case, with a 20-inch helix, that will be quite achievable at a reasonable grade. But if you've only got 15 inches for your radius, then you know you
Yeah.
just this is where the trade-off comes in. You just may not be able to push it to have that 3 inch level to level separation. You may have to be satisfied with 2.6 inches.
Okay. I have one last question.
Oh yeah, yeah, keep them coming.
If you were using Kato Unitrack
Yep,
in the Helix and regular Flex Track on the rest of your layout, would you make that transition from one kind of track to the other in that transition zone, or
Uh,
you've got that kind of like that transition curve, vertical transition curve. It seems like that would complicate it even a little bit more.
right. So that's typically on, uh, actually, let me lift this up. So I have this helix
Because
here.
I probably couldn't bend Kato Unitrack over that hump.
Right. So at the end, I don't know if you can see this. I can't see myself, but the track comes around here and then it goes out horizontally, and this is where that
Yeah,
vertical curve is going to be.
yeah.
Um, so the unitrack will come around, you join to a straight section here, and I would recommend getting on the other side of that, using the unitrack. But I think you'll find that flex track is a little bit, it will flex vertically better than Kato
Right,
unitrack will.
right.
So you do have room between where you exit the curve and where that final transition is. So you've probably got about 40.
Steve, we can't see any of that because your slideshow is still going.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Let me, all right, how about that?
Yeah.
All right, so let me,
Now it's just John.
all right, hang on a second.
There we go.
Too much technology. Let me unblur this.
There you go. Now you got it.
All right. So here's my flaring helix, but you can see, we're coming here off the curve. Now we're onto the straight section, and then up here is where you would want that vertical curve to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody else have any other questions?
I have one. Steve, are you guys with your calculator on your site able to do oval shaped helixes?
No, we oval helixes do come up once in a while, but I would say for every query about a circular helix, every 100 queries, maybe we get one or two on an oval. So it just really isn't economically justified to go in that direction. I'd be happy to have that discussion with you if you want to bounce some ideas, but yeah, currently we just make circular helixes.
Somebody in the chat mentioned a helix for T-track. Are you aware of any double T-track with a helix on it, and we could maybe see a photograph of it?
No, but at some point I plan to build one. I have some sketches. It's not simple because it's a big module and it would have to be broken into pieces. But yeah, I've got some ideas about how to do that. So
It's got my out-of-box mind just going crazy.
what's that?
It's got my out-of-box thinking mind going crazy.
I think it's a cool idea. I used to visit Tehachapi Loop on a pretty regular basis, and Williams Loop as well. And
Well,
yeah, I love that kind of thing.
I've certainly seen, I can't remember where, maybe twice now, a helix that takes a T-track layout up to an N-track layout.
Yes,
Next,
I've
yeah,
seen
next
that in the
weekend.
shows.
Next
Yeah,
weekend there'll be one at Elk City.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So there's one of those. I think there's another helix somewhere that takes an N-track up to a Fremo N.
Yeah,
yeah.
they both were in Grapevine. So you could go from T-track all the way up to Fremo End.
So I've never seen a double track T-track layout. If that's
that's
what you bad guys are thinking about.
that's what I'm looking for.
Steve, then in one
Steve.
fell swoop, you'll turn that world record T-track into only half of what it could have been.
Exactly.
Has anyone used Kato super elevated 447, 480 millimeter radius curves to do a helix?
Did you hear that, Steve?
Well, I did. I would not recommend super elevation in a helix. It serves really no practical purpose for model railroads. Super elevation is really about reducing railhead wear, and in the prototype it matters a lot, but it's purely cosmetic in model
The
railroads.
reason
Yeah.
the reason I asked is because it's double track for a double track helix, and it's also the largest radius that Kato makes. So that
Sure,
was the
right.
reason for my
Yeah.
question.
Well,
Yeah, that's a good question. That's
I'm
actually what I was thinking
surprised.
about.
Yeah, so I know they make a line of double track that is not super elevated, but sure, if that's what you're using, I think then it would be a matter of doing a little bit of prototyping and testing just to make sure the length train that you want to run. If you have a loop of that, you can probably mock that up with blocks of wood and things like that. But I would want to have some practical data first before committing to a helix using that track. Um, you know, tilting the cars, towards the inside of the center of the circle, that's only going to encourage them to come off the rails to string line. So you really want to know ahead of time the length of trains that you run on the grade that you want to run is going to work just fine in the helix. So yeah,
We're going to have to work that out, Steve, because as he said, that's the largest radius track that they have available. So that's very
sure.
attractive. And if you're trying to get inside a helix, that's where my head was.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I
one,
mean,
one more question here. Sorry to
yeah.
interrupt. Just to throw it out there, what would be a general cost of one of your helixes?
Well, I mean, that's the how long is a piece of string question. We're
Right, but just in general, average.
typically talking several $100s. Um, each layer that you add adds material. As you expand the radius, that adds material. A double track helix uses about 25 to 30% more material than a single track. So, all our costs are what determine our pricing. So the more material you use, the higher the price.
So average though, $200-300 for a
You can,
pretty
you can,
normal
you
sized.
Steve, another question.
Yep.
wait, hold on, please. Brett, you can see on the website, if you go to their website, you can see a variety of different kind of kits and
Well, I just was
what the
asking
pricing
because
is.
there's other people here probably wondering the same thing without going directly to the website right now. I just wanted a general answer.
Yeah, yeah. You're probably looking at several, like $400 or $500, depending on how high you want to go. But
Yeah.
it very much depends on the parameters of the helix.
Yep. All right. Next question. There was one coming in. Yeah. It looks to me like you have, I don't know what you've got, an unlimited number of options in there because there's all kinds of entry exit questions, like the angle of entry and exit.
Mhm.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about that.
So
But
I
just very
found your
brief.
website to be quite useful in terms of, just thinking about geometries and options like that.
Yes. Yeah. When you're considering your helix, one of the things that you need to think about is the angle of the entry versus the angle of the exit. A typical helix, you enter on one side, you loop around, and then you exit somewhere on the other side. Maybe head back down that shelf or that wall. What that means is it's not just a integer number of turns that you need to consider. It's so many turns plus 5/8 of a turn or plus half a turn at the top. So
Right.
we factor all of that in. You look at your track plan and you decide, okay, my helix angle is actually 5/8 of a turn, and then it will show you all of the solutions that work that get you to that vertical elevation with a geometry that is 5/8 of a turn. It's very rare that you enter at the bottom, you go round and round and round, and then you exit in the same direction at the top on the same side. That happens, but it's unusual.
All right. All right.
Steve,
Yes.
where are you shipping from? The accent tells me England, but are you in the US?
I'm a complicated fella. I am Australian.
Australian, okay.
I am also a US citizen. I live in Canada. And yeah, so we ship from Ontario, but we ship, anywhere. So yeah,
Okay.
and shipping
So
is
Those
Canadian shipping prices to the US are a little rough right now, aren't they? Yeah.
well, it's shipping anywhere is rough right now. Fuel prices are going up, and we're all kind of in that same boat. Doesn't really matter where you are.
Steve, what about doing an all Kato thing? Because you got that transition and leveling. right? That hump, that curve. Have
Yep.
you done all Kato
Yeah, yeah.
layouts?
Yes, yeah. So Kato works quite well. The only problem is you're restricted to the radii that Kato offers. So I think if you just pick a number at random, I don't think they have a 16-inch radius, for example. So
No,
if
I'm not so much of a radius. I'm saying you're coming out of whatever radius you can get, and you're at one deck or the other, and you got that little hump to go over where a flex track would make it easy, but Kato's rather stiff unless you start milling the plastic away.
right, so well, it needs to be a very gentle radius. It's we're easily talking 6 to 12 foot radius. So you can barely see it. If you can see the radius, it's too sharp.
That's an interesting way of thinking about it. If you have a hump there, then you did it wrong. Kind of
Oh,
in a
yeah,
way, right?
and you may get away with it.
Or if you have a problem where you think you might not be able to bend Kato Unitrack over it, then it's too much of a bend, right?
Well, I think you potentially going to have problems. This is the thing.
Right.
In my layout, it may work fine, and in your layout with the exact same geometry, it may not because your equipment is different from mine, or you're running at a different speed from mine, or the track beyond puts a lot of strain on the couplers. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons why two stretches of track may not behave the same way. So really, we're in the business of minimizing the opportunity for
Yes.
something unpleasant to happen.
Yeah. You just really want to work to make that very, very gradual.
Yeah, yeah. Look, the first Helix I ever built, I didn't even think about this. Like I said, I made it out of MDF, and the thing was built like a tank. When the layout was eventually broken up, it was the only thing that survived in one piece. It was like like a concrete structure, but didn't give it a moment's thought to the transition, and we got lucky. Everything worked fine. But what happens is at some length of train, it won't work fine. And so it really depends on is that within your operating length or not. So we used to run, this wasn't a very big Helix, 13-inch radius maybe, and we ran 30-car trains up that pretty regularly, but we got lucky.
The short hill or valley for the transitions could be an issue with coupling, car coupling, where the cars join together. So if your hill or your valley is too extreme, they'll uncouple. So it's all a matter of making sure your hill or valley, like I say, hill at the top, valley at the bottom, is as gradual as possible. Um, yeah, quite simple.
Yeah. And that's, going back to the slides, that's why you get these rules of thumb, like, it relates to the longest card that you run, double it, and then multiply it by the number of percent in your grade. And, all that's doing is just making it more and more gradual. Like let's say a 1% helix doesn't need the same radius as a 2% because, 2% is making more of a transition. So it definitely makes logical sense, but it's much more of NMRA makes no recommendation whatsoever for what that radius should be, that vertical radius.
Steve, how do you recommend attaching Kato track to the Helix material?
Well, you have a couple of options. If the helix is just going to be put onto your layout and left there, then I would be fine using adhesive. So construction adhesive, or some people use like I think that the brand name is Alex. It's in like a white tube. It's basically a latex construction adhesive. You also have the screw holes. So if you lay your track as you build your helix, which is very common, you need to drill out those little screw holes in the Kato Unitrack, which would allow you to drop a screw into the deck and screw it down. In my case, I've like when I built that double helix, I actually pinned all of the track using track pins because I knew I was going to be picking it up and moving it around on a regular basis. And I wasn't quite, and also we experience, pretty high extremes in temperature here. It'll be, in the high 30, 85, 90 degrees during the summer, and it's down below, down near zero in the winter. So I elected for using physical pins to hold it in place. But if you're not doing that, if you're not transporting your stuff around, then construction adhesive is a perfectly fine way to go. And the nice thing about Kato UniTRAK is that if you're using adhesive, it's not trying to spring outward like FlexTrack is while the glue is drying. It's just you plop down your piece of track and the helix will adhere to it.
Other questions? 520. You must have hit a nerve there, Steve. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for all the questions, everyone. And if you have more questions, I'm sure Steve would want you to get in touch with them and work through those. The last thing I've got on my mind is if anybody on the call today has either a child or a grandchild in the, 8th, 9th, or 10th grade complaining about geometry or trigonometry and I'm never going to use this and all that kind of stuff, you'll have something to talk to them about. Because you're sure going to have to pull those formulas out when you're working on some of this stuff.
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
You told us there wasn't going to be any math, but I've got a headache anyway. So.
Well, let us take that headache on for you. That's kind of what we do.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, thank you very much, Steve. We really appreciate that. And thanks to everybody for joining in today on your Saturday afternoon or evening. I noticed we have some people from the UK, some people from Spain. Thanks for coming from anywhere you are in the world for ZoomTRAK by NRail. And we will see you all here this time next month.
Okay, thank you all.
Thanks
Good night
all.
now.
Thanks, John.